I'm going to give you a tour of our house.
Ron's parents helped him purchase this property, so it was very near and dear to him.
And I just knew that I wanted my American dream to own my own home. And I was ecstatic when I was told that I had been approved for a $150,000 loan.
The day I bought my house, it was both exciting and scary. Well, both of my sisters were taking pictures. They were just snapping away. They were just so proud of me.
Lenders are poised to take back more homes this year than any other.
Foreclosure at an alarming rate.
My kids have always looked up to me.
Millions of foreclosures have been.
And for something like this to happen where I built this dream house,
Desperate times for the families.
and then it's just crumbling right before our eyes.
Because courts simply want to process foreclosures as fast as possible.
Not knowing when they're going to come and snatch it from under our feet.
A 2011 National Commission reported that since the mortgage-backed Wall Street collapse began, 4 million families have lost their homes to foreclosure. Retirement accounts and life savings swept away. We've seen a tidal wave of charges and lawsuits leveled against the nation's big banks who, at the center of the collapse, both financed the subprime lenders and then reaped huge profits from the sale of trillions of dollars in toxic securities. Too big to fail, the big banks got the government to bail them out and return them to profitability. Yet numerous attempts to stabilize our tumbling housing market and help the average American have utterly failed. Today, 14 million homeowners owe more on their mortgages than their homes are worth. Most of them are at risk of losing their homes. Until we stop foreclosures, housing values will continue to fall, and virtually all Americans, whether struggling to hang on to a home or not, will pay a price.
A foreclosure creates a remarkable amount of damage. You have depressed property tax values, payments to the community, which will impact the schools, impact the police, impact all kinds of city services. If anybody didn't realize the importance of the mortgage market to our community and to our country before 2008, everybody understands it now.
And then we hear a little small-town guy in Greensboro, North Carolina, named Jeff Thigpen, have a press conference, talk about the fact that he had found over 4,000 documents that were forged in his office that he had checked on.
We did a study actually looking at the experience of Latino families throughout the country that had gone through foreclosure. So not only they lost their equity and the down payment, they also went through their retirement savings, they maxed out their credit card, the children's college education. By the time they lost the home anyway. They were left with nothing.
All of us are paying a price for this home mortgage crisis. And all of us will pay an even steeper price if we allow this crisis to continue to deepen.
But it has deepened.
Facing foreclosure, they camped out in January to get in line to beg their bank for lower payments on their mortgage.
The president had created a program that gave banks incentives and guidelines to modify loans.
The line went down the block and doubled back twice.
But the program was voluntary, and so the banks lacked a commitment to it. The great majority of applicants, though eligible for loan modifications, were stymied in their attempts to get them.
So we've been fighting them, trying to get loan modifications, and they'll come back and say, well, you know, your unemployment does not count.
Either I got hung up on, connected to another department that never answered, disconnected.
I think we've sent paperwork up no less than 6 times.
We hear stories about people's documents being shredded. We heard one story about a servicer that at the end of the day, anything that was on the fax machine, because of privacy concerns, they were shredding it.
Don't look now, but there's something funny going on over there at the bank, George.
Once upon a time, the bank that loaned you money to buy your house had a stake in your success.
The money's not here. Well, your money's in Joe's house. That's right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. What are you going to do, foreclose on them?
Today, a Wall Street investor owns your mortgage, not the bank. The bank you make your payment to is simply a service agent. As servicers, they have an interest in making fees, and banks make more money in foreclosure fees than they do in modifying your loan.
So for servicers, the real incentive is to try to collect payments as cheaply as possible to make the most money, even with the money that the administration has put forward to say, please do modifications, here's $1,000 a modification. In many cases, it's still not as much as they would make in the foreclosure. And so for the servicer, even though the modification would be the right thing for the homeowner, the foreclosure is actually going to be the right thing for the servicer.
America's big banks have shown that they're not only too big to fail, but also too big to care about how their actions affect average Americans. But that may change, since they've been discovered to have quietly circumvented the laws that protect the property rights of millions of Americans.
Caught in a jam of their own making, some companies appear to be resorting to forgery and phony paperwork to throw people down on their luck out of their homes.
In the spring of 2011, 60 Minutes ran a story about a Florida attorney who discovered that her bank had forged documents to speed up her eviction.
The banks whose paperwork was handled by the Doc's forgery mill included Wells Fargo, U.S. Bank, and Bank of America.
It's a scheme called Robo-Signing. In it, America's big banks contracted companies who hired minimum wage workers to sign false names and swear that they were bank vice presidents on documents that banks then used to foreclose on homes.
A massive mortgage fraud investigation's underway in Guilford County. The Register of Deeds office says hundreds of documents involving home loans are potentially fraudulent.
When a North Carolina official examined his own record system, he found them to be riddled with illegitimate robo-signed title documents.
I had just witnessed the enormous and callous disregard by a number of our nation's largest mortgage and lending institutions for the rule of law.
Robo-signing is basically when people are signing documents on behalf of financial institutions and legal entities, and they have no knowledge of really what the substance of what they're signing. And they're doing it in mass production, like thousands of documents a day.
As a result of the 60 Minutes investigation, one of the robo-signers that they focused on was a signer named Linda Green. And as you can see, in my investigation, there were over 2,000 documents that we found with Linda Green signatures. And as you see here, there were between 4 to 15 different signature variations in these documents.
Who is going to want to buy this property? Once we decide that a document has been forged, meaning somebody else has signed someone's name on that document, at law we say that document actually doesn't exist in the public record. So even though visually you can go and look it up in the records office, it disappears out of the chain of title. So now you have instability of title for that property.
These documents are used in the court of law, and they're used for evidentiary purposes. They're used if a person gets foreclosed on. They're used if a person wants to go out and buy another home. They're used within the context of title insurance and the chain of title, and the idea that we can have clarity and certainty and transparency and fair dealing in these transactions is crucial, and these documents are there in order to provide that certainty. A lot of these robo-signed documents are ticking time bombs. They're already in the public record, and if someone goes to resell their house in 2 years, what impact is that going to have on their financial transactions and legal transactions going forward? I think it's a point of major concern that we all should be concerned about.
And what we've seen in Delaware, in 22% of the cases that we've investigated, and this is just the beginning, they've literally foreclosed on behalf of the wrong entity. So that's how screwed up this has become. They don't follow their own rules, and that's why we think they violated the Delaware Deceptive Trade Practices Act.
A lot of the issues are complicated, but I think you can boil it down to, if you look at a document and you see a person's name signed and it's signed 4 to 15 different ways, you know we have a problem. What I now know is that it's been going on for years. But it wasn't until April when 60 Minutes did an investigative report on DocX. And what they did was they interviewed employees or former employees of DocX who admitted on national television that they had signed Linda Green's signature and also notarized other people who were not Linda Green. Employees would interchangeably sign their names to documents as assistant secretaries or vice presidents. They had no real official relationship to The lender institution or the attorneys representing them, they just knew that they were making $7, $8, $9 an hour, and they had to sit at a table and sign thousands of documents each day. I have over 12 million land record documents in my office, and I was very concerned that they might be here. We were the first office in the country to do that. And once we did it, we then forwarded the information to the North Carolina Attorney General, as well as to federal regulators who have had active investigations around 14 of the major lenders in the United States, including Wells Fargo, Bank of America. We're working with our county attorney to look at possible litigation related to the fraudulent documents or the forged signatures. So we're looking at legal action.
Rooted in what I believe is a betrayal of public trust.
We called for an immediate stoppage of foreclosure actions related to DocX. That didn't happen. And I take that silence for complicity. And I think that they know, or they should have known, what was going on. And they should have done something about it. And they didn't. And as a result, millions of Americans are living with the consequence of it today.
But right at that period, I mean, 2003, 04, you had a lot of cash on Wall Street. I mean, there was just a ton of money out there. There was cash looking for a place to go.
So I think a lot of folks were being sold what are now commonly called subprime mortgages that had terms that you wouldn't want if you were a prime borrower.
There were lenders who were selling these loans knowing that the person who was getting that loan was never going to be able to afford the payment once it got beyond 2 years.
And they bundle all of those mortgage payments into what are called mortgage-backed securities. And they're investors from Wall Street and would buy upfront cash for a promise of getting those stream of income. Corruption started when mortgage brokers and originators started taking out higher fees. So their pockets were lined immediately.
A lot of low-income borrowers, because it takes time to make their loan, they would get shoved into a subprime loan because it was more lucrative. And what you would also see later on in the boom was anywhere from about 30 to 50% of people who were getting a subprime loan could have qualified for those prime rates.
The day I bought my house, the attorney would just flip the page and say, sign right here, sign right here, sign right here. And I'm really thinking to myself, what in the world have I gotten myself into?
Purchasing a home is not only one of the most important decisions a family makes, but it's also one of the most complicated decisions.
I was ecstatic that I was even going to be a homeowner and have my American dream. I was not educated and did not know that I actually really needed to have someone to represent myself.
It was supposed to be my attorney, to my knowledge. Now that I know, I've done some research, but the attorney was more so acting on the behalf of the bank.
A lot of folks were being sold what are now commonly called subprime mortgages, which basically means they were selling, lenders, brokers, mortgage companies were selling people loans that had terms that you wouldn't want if you were a prime borrower. A lot of those adjustable rate mortgages started off with very affordable looking payments. They would have what's called a teaser rate. So you were looking at a 4% interest rate initially, which made your loan really affordable. It looked really affordable. And then, sometimes after 1 month or 2 months or 6 months, the rate would jump in my experience, a lot of folks didn't know that they had adjustable rate loans. They would adjust up and they would be somewhere, usually with an adjustable rate, the cap was somewhere between 14 and 17 was sort of typically what I was seeing.
It was an interest-only ARM mortgage. And the majority of my neighborhood had the same type of interest-only ARM mortgage. It's like 80% of my subdivision, had Countrywide KB Homes deal.
The folks that I've worked with that did know that they had an adjustable rate loan were kind of soothed into signing the paperwork by being told, that your credit score is kind of low, but if you make all of the payments for the first 2 years, then I will refinance your loan into a fixed rate mortgage.
There were lenders who were selling these loans knowing that the person who was getting that loan was never going to be able to afford the payment once it got beyond 2 years. It's because the rates were lower, they were being told this can get you into a house that you otherwise, might not have been able to afford. It's what everybody does. Housing prices are booming. You don't want to miss this wave. So get into it now, build your home equity, and then we'll refinance you to a lower rate later.
After 2 years, or before the 2-year period expired, we were supposed to try to get the loan refinanced to see if we can get a fixed rate. That was the consensus given to all of the homeowners in my division, that we were supposed to try to get the loan refinanced. That was just something to get us in the door to acquire the house.
We know that we shouldn't all trust everything that is told to us, but we've all been tricked once or twice in our lives, and we've regretted it after it happened. And I know that the people who ended up in these mortgages that took advantage of them, that their sense of regret exceeds anything I can imagine.
My kids have always looked up to me, and for something like this to happen where I built this dream house and then it's just crumbling right before our eyes, it was a total embarrassment to me. So, and to my kids, I felt like a failure. I'm going to stand up for what I believe in. I'm going to stand up against this, and I'm going to fight back.
So you're saying I can ask this cat any question?
The cat is connected to the computer. You just type in the question, it will read his mind. There the answer comes.
You're the man! I've been looking for this for weeks.